Hi readers, welcome back to Reads with Rune B. Today we're going to be continuing with Ember, Echoes of Ashes, Book 1 by Jessica Schmidt. I'm going to be doing Chapter 2 and 3, the final chapters for me. And I hope you like it. The book is now available to purchase through Amazon as an ebook. So check it out, readers. Alright, let's get to it. The downpour was relentless as Laderick walked the dark streets of Elandil. Felids, with their natural ability to see in the dark, had never quite got around to lighting their roads with torches or lanterns. In their mind, if you cannot see in the dark, do not go out in the dark. It was very simple. Yeah, right, Laderick thought, trudging through the mud, ducking his head into his coat to keep some of the rain off his face. The city of Elandil was quite spread out, covering the corners of the crossings where the rivers met. 6 bridges spanned the rivers, connecting each of the 4 quadrants of the city. 4 of them made a square atop the waters, and the other 2 connected diagonally above where the rivers met, forming an X shape. In the middle of the X was a tall lighthouse, the beacon shining at all times. Throughout the water, around the network of bridges, were houses and hotels on stilts, providing space for travelers to stay for more than reasonable rates at all time of year. If you could overlook the fact that you were suspended above rushing river and pointed boulders that peeked their heads through the black water every now and then, they were quite worth the bargain. The rivers that met were called Nabanja and Serveto, running north to south and east to west, respectively. Where they met in the center of Elandil, the waters raged constantly, as each river fought with the other to flow in their desired direction. Neither gained an advantage. Choppy water and rough waves made it nearly impossible for boats to cross through the city, so docks were spaced along its perimeter. If goods needed to be transferred downriver, they would first need to be unloaded onto the shore, and then carted across the bridges to other docks. The wide bridges that created an X above the crossings were extensions of the 2 major roads that intersected just where the rivers met. The road that led northwest was named Labyrinth. The road that led to the northeast was referred to as the Walk. These 2 paths were some of the most traveled roads in the far land. Thus, Elandil was quite prosperous. The Savage Lion Inn, the tavern Laderick had just left, was in the northeast section of the city, with rivers to the west and south. Laderick, however, headed north towards some of the more permanent houses, where most of the Felid residents lived. The streets were empty. Felidae, generally out during the night, were instead holed up in their houses out of the deluge. The rain poured as he walked. Miniature rivers of mud ran around his boots as they squelched down the road, but he was close. Up another hill, around the corner, he came to a line of older houses in one of the more established parts of the city. Midiga's home was a small wooden place, with 1 door, 2 windows, and a chimney. Laderick knocked on the door, huddled in his coat. "Midiga!" he called. No answer. The rain was relentless. He knocked again, harder this time. "Midiga, I know for a fact your race is nocturnal. I know you happen to belong to that half." "Open up! It's cold!" Still no answer. "I'm wet!" Nothing. Laderick sighed. If this was about that time in Padstow for the 15th time. I'm sorry." There was more silence, and Ladrick was about to give up until he heard the sound of several locks being undone. The door swung open, and Ladrick stormed inside, out of the rain. "Gods, Midiga, I hate water just as much as you do." "Well, you shouldn't have pulled that stunt in Padstow then, purred a feminine voice. From the shadows of the room paced an elegant feline. Her fur was a sleek blue-gray color, like deep-colored smoke. She was nearly indistinguishable from the darkness around them. Without the dim light from the coals in the fireplace, Ladrick wouldn't have been able to see her at all, save for her sparkling amber eyes and a patch of white fur on her forearm shaped like a crescent moon. "It was one time, and it wasn't my fault. Can you light a torch?" he asked, looking around frustrated. "Not all of us can see in the dark, you know." Midiga chuckled and removed a torch from its sconce and lighting it with the coals. "Better?" she asked, mounting the torch again. Her long tail swept from side to side with her hips as she walked. "Do you have the money you owe me?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, not exactly," Ladrick stammered, completely forgotten he owed her anything in the first place. He looked around, trying to change the subject. "I see you've been doing well," he said, gesturing around the room. The house was quaint and cozy. Animal pelts hung on the walls with large metal hooks. In the corner was a mat on the floor, plush and filled with down. There was one chest, a small table, a singular chair. The rest of the room was bare. "I like to think so," she chittered, looking around, purring warmly. She smiled, pointed ivory showing. "I don't need much." She demonstrated this even in her clothing. She wore simple cotton clothes in a neutral color and as minimal as she could get away with. Felix never wore shoes. And I'm going to see if... Nope, I can't do it. There is pictures of all the characters, or at least I think some of them. Right now I'm looking at a picture of Midiga, and it's really cool. I really like her. "What brings you to my den?" she asked. Ladrick took a seat in her chair, laying out his coat on the floor to dry, beside the fire to dry. He ran his fingers through his hair, shaking the water out of it. Despite his best efforts, he was still damp as ever. He sighed, resigning himself, before turning to face Midiga. "I got a tip a bit ago that I figured might interest you," he began, and then he relayed the story of the two men entering the tavern, and their own story of the blood-hungry Candide. The cat listened intently, both ears swiveled in his direction. "He said there were at least 6, he finished, leaning back. "Impossible. Blood-hungry hardly ever work together, and not even in pairs," she hissed, ears flattening against her skull, her claws sheathed and unsheathed with anxiety. Ladrick shrugged. "Maybe. That's what I was thinking too. But there has to be some truth to his story. And even if it's just 2 traveling together, running down some poor wretch, we might still get some kind of reward out of it," he said, crossing his arms, waiting for her verdict. Midiga growled under her breath. "If it gives me some chance to kill some dogs, I'm in," she decided. The Lididae are naturally nervous around Candide, even if they aren't blood-hungry. Midiga, having grown up in Elandil, where Candide were quite common, scarcely tried to distinguish her racism. Scarcely decide to disguise her racism. And since she had had quite a few bad experiences with them in the past, she believed her negative disposition was more than justified. Ladrick nodded. We can loot their things and see what payment the victim can provide if they're still alive. There may well be enough to cover what I owe you, and we might get some leads on where the others might be. I don't like blood-hungry any more than the next man. Or cat, Midiga interjected with a grin. She didn't like to admit it, but she was excited at the idea of chasing a lead. She'd been dying to get out of Elandil recently. It had been over a year since she'd had any excitement. Much too long in her own opinion. She was a wanderer at heart and had been sedentary for too long. She hated not having anything to do. It gave her too much time to think, and to drown in her own thoughts. Midiga looked Ladrick over once again, ears tilting in his direction, as she changed her tone. "Where have you been, Ladrick? It's been a long time since your last stop through Elandil." Her eyes scanned him, and she furrowed her brow, worried. Hopefully not getting into too much trouble. Ladrick's mind flashed through his escapades of the last year. He glanced at his bag on the floor behind him. Nothing too rough, just the same as always. Stealing from the rich, giving to the needy, keeping whatever's left over. You know the drill. He swallowed, glancing at his bag and back at Midiga. "Well, actually, gods, I don't even know if I should show you." "What is it?" she questioned, ears perking up. Her tail flicked left and right with anticipation. Ladrick sighed and pulling his pack off and rifling through it, he pulled out a small pouch, and one that fit into his palm. Midiga watching, he gently pulled the strings to open it, revealing a sparkling stone that had its own sort of light, shining with a brilliant ruby color. "A spectral stone!" The Felidae recognized what it was immediately, her eyes wide in awe. Subconsciously, her hand drifted toward it, as if drawn by an unseen force. She flattened her ears slightly, looking back up at him. "Why haven't you sold this? You could get quite a price for this one. You'd have enough to repay me 3 times over." "Yeah, or take the chance that someone would rat me out for having it," he replied, putting it back in the pouch. "The goblins that had the stone didn't know what it was, or so they claimed before I killed them." He put the pouch back in his bag. You know how it is. Getting caught with one of these things can get you thrown in jail, or worse, sent to deal with the spectral it belongs to. I'd rather try to return it to them. It's the only way I can see myself getting any kind of reward out of it." He grimaced, imagining himself being caught and forced to face the spectral it was stolen from. "It's safest, anyhow." The spectrals are beings born with an affinity for the truest kind of natural magic. Human in appearance, they are consumed by an element before birth. Once this element comes to fruition, they are trained as powerful sorcerers. Remaining aloof from the rest of the world to practice the art of magic, once trained, they select the stone to become their spectral stone, which they meditate with each day for the rest of their lives. It focuses their power, and they are able to store energy for later use. After years of meditation, the stones become wells of energy, able to be accessed at a moment's notice, to allow the spectral to perform amazing magical feats. Most spectral stones are worn as pendants or found in staves or crowns. However, the one Ladrick had in his possession was the naked stone on its own, a fire dancer stone at that. If the spectral that that had lost their stone were to discover Ladrick had tried to pawn it, he would be hunted and likely burned to a crisp. It is extremely frowned upon, even amongst thieves, to take a spectral stone, due to the extreme consequences. Ladrick was putting his own life in danger, just by carrying the stone on his person. I don't know who originally stole it, but somehow those goblins had one, along with the rest of the loot I may or may not have taken. He finished his story, reaching into the bag again. I had enough to get my pack enchanted, with an expanding charm to make room for my things, and enough to buy these. From his belt he drew 2 long daggers, each encased in a thick black leather. He carefully removed one from its sheath to reveal a peculiar blade. It was sleek and iridescent, seeming to shine with all the colors of the rainbow. It captured and reflected every ray of light with dazzling beauty. I still keep my swords on me, but these are nice in certain situations. He held it out to Mitiga, letting her feel its balance. To test their sharpness, the Felid pulled a whisker from her muzzle and held it above the shimmering blade. She dropped it and watched as it sliced the whisker clean in half as soon as it touched the strange metal. "Very nice," she said, leaning back. "These are extremely sharp." "Dwarven made?" she questioned. "I don't know that much, but I know a good blade when I see one," he said, sheathing it and hooking both of them back onto his belt. He glanced out the window. The sun was already starting to rise, twilight peeking over the horizon. "If we're going to save this poor, hunted traveler, we should probably get moving soon." She nodded, her shadow flickering in the firelight. "Right, let me grab my things from the wall." She retrieved a set of thin leather armor, the heaviest armor she could be bothered to wear, and then padded over to the wooden chest on the floor, kneeling and opening the heavy oaken lid. From within she drew a curved, polished bow and quiver loaded with arrows, fletched with black feathers. She bared her teeth with a wicked smile, feeling alive once again. Let's go. Right, and now we are on to chapter 3. This is the last chapter I can read of Ember. I have had a lot of fun doing this, so let's dive in. The light of dawn was just beginning to show, and the rain had calmed as the two headed out towards the southeastern section of town, just past the dock to its south. The dark forest loomed. This was the northernmost section of the Weald. It spanned most of the southern part of the continent, becoming thick as jungle as it neared the equator. These woods south of Irlandale were notorious for being thick and inhospitable. The trees extended far to the south, making up the territories of several traditional Felidae kingdoms, almost completely surrounding the closer coastal Heman city of Marascale to the south. Mitiga and Ladrick made good time, reaching the edge of the Weald just before sunrise. It was still early in the morning, only a few hours since Ladrick had heard Harlan's tale in the Savage Lion Inn. Quietly, they exited the city and darted into the woods. Moving with the swift grace of a hunter, Mitiga wasted no time in searching for tracks in the mud or signs of a disturbance. Deeper into the forest they traveled, keeping their eyes peeled not only for clues, but signs of the dark creatures that cared to reside within the woods as well. Ladrick could handle many kinds of unforgiving creatures, including blood-hungry, quite well in his own opinion, but that didn't mean he would welcome any unexpected surprises. After nearly an hour of searching, they came upon a lead. "Here," Mitiga breathed, waving Ladrick toward a tree with her paw. "Look." He walked over, feet sinking into the muddy forest floor. In the bark of a young tree was a prominent claw mark. The mark carved was deep into the trunk, and revealed a tinted green interior. "It's fresh," Ladrick muttered, running his fingertips over the mark. "Otherwise the exposed flesh would have died and turned brown already." "You're telling me this as if I don't already know," chided Mitika softly. Her whiskers twitched, sensing the delicate changes in the air currents. "The angle of the mark suggests they went this way," she concluded, gesturing east. Ladrick nodded, and they continued their search. Though the sun was making its ascent, the woods remained dark as ever, the canopy of thick green leaves shielding the ground from sunlight. A small red fox darted through the pines, disturbing the stillness of the brush. The birds were beginning to sing their morning song. Large water droplets fell from the leaves, occasionally splashing on the scalp of Ladrick or Mitika. The droplets were huge and cold, and soon chilled Ladrick's head at his own annoyance. "I hate rain," he muttered, lifting his leg and stepping over a fallen tree. "Especially cold rain in the spring." "Quiet," hushed Mitika, ears swiveling every direction, listening. "I mean, isn't spring rain supposed to be warm?" he mused, marching through the mud. It squelched loudly beneath his boots. A branch snapped when he lifted his foot, and like a whip, sliced clean through his pants, cutting his leg. He cursed in frustration. "I said quiet," Mitika said with a snarl. Ladrick looked at her, taken aback. She was standing completely still, on high alert. Her muzzle was raised, her teeth bared, her nostrils flared. Ears aimed directly ahead. "I hear something." "What is it?" Ladrick breathed, barely audible. Mitika kept her head trained due east, silent, her tail twitching. She stood motionless, hardly breathing, daring not to make a sound. In the distance, she could hear the shuffling of bodies through the underbrush. "I hear at least 5 individuals moving fast," she huffed, finally looking around them, eyeing the canopy of leaves. "Normally I would climb a tree to get a good view, but these woods are so thick, it would be pointless." She raised her nose to the wind and inhaled deeply. The wind was blowing toward them, masking their own scent, but bringing with it a wealth of information to Mitika. She could smell heavily the disgusted smell that was wet canned, and also a smell she was unfamiliar with. With that, she started to move again, faster than before, in the direction of the disruption. The thrill of the hunt was beginning to grip her, and the excitement caused her breathing to quicken. Ladrick followed and carried on for another couple of miles or so, when a bone-chilling howl pierced the still quiet of the morning. This was not a lonely howl from a sad hound dog. No. This was a hunter's call, a signal that prey had been sighted. They froze for a duration, an eerie few seconds of ominous tension. It sounded like it was coming from right in front of them. "We might be too late," Wadrick grimaced, starting to move forward once more, taking the lead. The ground had elevated into an incline, and they were nearing the top of a steep hill. At its crest, a shocking scene revealed itself. From their position at the hilltop, Mitika and Ladrick spotted 6 canid moving through the sparser trees in formation, closing in on a rocky cliffside to their left. A small waterfall, no more than 4 stories tall, cascaded over the wall and crashed to the forest floor. where a smaller river raged, swollen with the recent rain. The waterfall formed a small fork in the Servato River north. The forest floor below met the rocky wall, perfectly cornering unsuspecting prey. The Canidae were on the same side of the river as Ladrick and Mitiga, but a blanket of trees below hid their targets from sight. "Let's go!" urged Ladrick, running down the hill toward the pack of Canidae. Few trees grew on the steep incline, and his feet moved so fast he nearly felt out of control. He could sense Mitiga's presence beside him as he ran. Several of the Canidae that had been moving in formation paused, snapping their heads around. Intrigued by the new scents moving closer to them, they fell out of formation in confusion, now turning their attention to the west, where Ladrick and Mitiga emerged. A high-pitched scream pierced the early morning, coming from the rock face. Most of the Canidae turned back around to continue pursuing their prey. 3 of them stopped and squared up to Mitiga and Ladrick, teeth bared in hateful snarls. Behind them the river roared without pause. The area with which 2 groups met in the forest was only dotted with trees as the forest thinned out along the river, favoring tall grass instead in the clearing. "Oh, look! A stray!" one Canid spoke with a snarl. It was gray in color, with red eyes standing out against its fur. Red eyes, the mark of a blood-hungry. The other 2 growled deeply in their chests, gripping their short swords and holding them at the ready. All 3 of them wore crude tan leather armor. The gray one also wore a helmet, embellished with a gold coin that looked hastily glued onto its surface. A crude symbol of leadership. He addressed Mitiga directly, brandishing his own sword towards her menacingly. You should mind your own business, cat." With that, he barked in Canid language, and the others lunged forward to attack. "Hey!" yelled Ladrick at the gray Canid. "I'm right here, you know," he huffed, a little offended that the gray blood-hungry hadn't even acknowledged him. He dodged a sloppy swing from a sword. The Canidae were clumsy when it came to combat at the most, less agile than the Felidae, or even humans. What they lacked in dexterity, though, they made up for in brute strength and stamina. "This is not a good time, idiot," Mitiga snapped, backing up. The other 2 Canidae had teamed up on her, due to their instinctual dislike of each other. The gray Candidate had decided she was the primary target. "I could use a hand," the Felid hinted, keeping her eyes on her attackers. Ladrick nodded, continuing to watch his own attacker, gauging his every move. The rust-colored Canid stalking him had yet to take his eyes off of Ladrick's throat. The wolfman swung once again, and Ladrick sidestepped, dodging the attack easily. The Canid might not have the best technique, but oftentimes they didn't need to, due to their strategy for taking down their prey was to tire it out, as their stamina was virtually unlimited. Once their attacker would grow weary and inevitably make a mistake. Then they would go in for the kill. For the throat, and even without weapons, their claws are still deadly sharp, almost as much as the felids, though they aren't able to retract them like catfolk. Mitiga was attempting to back up and get a bit of range to fire her bow, but her attackers weren't giving her a chance. As soon as she would reach for an arrow, one of the canids would snap at her arm or swing their sword at her head, only protected by her unsheathed claws. She held them at the ready. "Meow!" she cried in her own language, lashing out at the canid that had lunged for her again. He was slow and clumsy, and she made him pay for it. She landed a slice across his nose, and he whimpered in pain. Ladrick had removed his own weapons, the twin daggers, and was holding them at the ready. They shone in the new morning sunlight, dazzling and colorful. One he held facing forward in his right hand, towards his enemy, as he might hold a sword. The other he held hilt first, the blade pointing behind him, with the blade pointing in each direction. The pose allowed for more freedom of movement, allowing him to either attack or defend, even with his back turned. Wasting no time, knowing he would tire out before the cannon even started to pant, he decided to make his move. He lunged forward, feigning an attack with his right-handed blade. The cannon dodged left, and Ladrick rotated his body in response, spinning away, jerking his left arm backward. It all happened in seconds. The blade buried itself deep in the cannon's side, and he yipped deep in pain. Ladrick continued twisting, and then pulled the blade out, whirling it around in the face of his opponent once more. There was a large gash in the cannon's left side, and it was bleeding profusely. He dropped his crude sword to the ground, holding his side in pain. His red eyes burned holes in Ladrick's, murder written in his gaze. When Ladrick's cannon snarled in agony, the two closing in on Midiga became distracted. Just long enough for her to draw an arrow, she fired it point blank at the black cannon to her right, landing the shot between its eyes, instantly killing it. Now it was only her and the grey one that had first spoken, the one who appeared to be the leader. He flinched slightly when she shot his companion. Newfound hatred for the field consumed his mind, and he growled deep in his throat. "I said you should mind your own business," he barked, moving close to Midiga so she couldn't draw again without opening a weak spot. She took a few steps back, and her tail bumped into a tree. The cannon's fur was standing on end, and his body quivered with anticipation. "Or at least stay out of mine. I am Carcross. I am thirsty," he howled, snapping at her arm, grazing her skin, drawing blood. His pupils contracted in euphoria as he licked her blood from his chops. Midiga watched, horrified. High-pitched howl pierced the forest then, coming from the cliffside. Carcross's ears twitched. He bared his teeth in a vicious snarl, taking a step back from Midiga. "Unfortunately, your blood is not that which I crave, but I assure you my brethren aren't picky." Suddenly he yipped something in his own language. The wounded canid, which had been focused on Ladrick, pivoted and lunged at Midiga. His sudden retreat caught Ladrick off guard, and he looked on hopeless. "Watch out!" Ladrick yelled, knowing it was too late, but still turning to give chase. Midiga's reflexes were inhuman, and her feline ears caught the canid switching positions. She rounded to face him just in time. He tackled her to the ground. The grey canid turned and ran back to where the other canid had gone before. "Don't let him escape!" Midiga yelled, shoving the injured canid off her body. Ladrick turned to give chase, but humans were much slower than wolf people. Nonetheless, he followed Carcross into the trees, toward the rocky wall where they guessed they had cornered their prey. Midiga rolled over onto the injured canid. pinning him to the ground and dodging the snap at her neck. She wrenched another arrow from her quiver, arching it over her head. "Bad dog," she said with a hiss, before stabbing the arrow into his eye socket like a dagger. He let loose an unintelligible scream before his body went limp, and he fell into darkness. She wasted no time in removing her arrow from his face. Standing then and giving chase to Ladrick, it only took her a few moments to catch up with him. The muddy ground was hard for Ladrick to maneuver through, and his shoes sinking deeper into the mud as he neared the river. Midiga wasn't restricted. Going shoeless as all Phillida did, she was light-footed, and her strides seemed to glide across the ground as she pulled ahead of Ladrick, hoping she wasn't too late. Without warning from up ahead, a bright white light followed by a thunderous boom shook the forest. Hundreds of birds took off from the trees, cawing and screeching as they flew away from the explosion. Ladrick stumbled and fell. Even Midiga was nearly shaken off her feet. The light had come from the cliffside, but she pressed on, undeterred. The trees were sparse, but not enough for her to get a decent view of what had happened. She ran to the tree to a shocking sight. In the clearing against the foot of the cliff, 3 Canidae were dead, the earth below them indented in the shape of their bodies as if they had been blasted into the ground. The trees were smoking and blackened. The rocky wall itself was charred and fractured. On her right she spotted Carcos, swimming across the river away from the clearing with a couple of the other Canids. He looked injured but still mobile. She turned to follow them, groaning at the idea of having to swim, and a strange sound stopped her in her tracks. A high-pitched whimper was coming from the smoldering hole in the rocky wall. The indentation was smoking and fresh. Ladrick finally caught up, and noticing Midiga had paused in her chase and was going to inspect the hole in the wall that had mist rising from it. As she approached, a young woman stepped out from the hole. She wore tattered brown clothing, a green cloak, and a hood that covered her hair and ears. She limped out of the wall, scanning the clearing, a single dagger in her right hand, held at the ready. Then she looked at Midiga, golden eyes narrowed, worried. "They are dead, I hope?" she asked, almost uncertain. Her voice was soft and smooth, and though she was breathing quite hard, Midiga nodded, brow furrowed. The woman sighed, exhaustion and relief emanating from her. "They had been chasing me for days. I cannot thank you enough. Oh!" As she spoke, she sank toward the ground, landing first on her knees before falling to the ground. Midiga jumped forward, not quite fast enough to catch her, before she hit the mud. "Ladrick!" she cried, holding the woman's face just above the ground. He was already running to her side. He turned the fainted woman over and felt her neck for a pulse. "She's alive," he said, out of breath. Cradling her head, he continued, "but her pulse is weak. We should take her back with us." Midiga nodded, reaching her hand paw under the woman's shoulder and lifting her with Ladrick's assistance. The mystery woman was several inches shorter than Ladrick, very light and easy to lift. The two made their way back to Elandil as fast as they could, worried for the life of the one between them. And that is where this reading of Ember is going to end. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you pick up the rest of the book. Right, keep reading. Bye for now.